So I just want to like continue a little bit about why we don't change, or at least why we don't just change by saying we're going to change. Why a person won't just change. Change requires a tremendous amount of effort for a person to change themselves. And as I told you, I used chemistry and I talked about the nucleus, the nuclear reaction, and the chemical reaction. I want to point out something I forgot to mention. When you have a nuclear reaction, remember the reason why there's a complete different element from the original element that goes through the reaction. Why there's a total different element that comes out on the other end, on the other side of the reaction. As I mentioned before, within the nucleus, there is a change within the nucleus. And the nucleus is the heart, it is the core, it's what keeps the atom, everything's together. It changes the atomic number. The nucleus changes the atomic number. The atomic number defines and describes what type of element the atom will be. So the nucleus changes the atomic number and therefore changes the element. Okay? What I didn't mention, what I do want to mention, in a chemical reaction, the nucleus doesn't change, as I mentioned before in the previous video. In a chemical reaction, the nucleus does not change. What happens in a chemical reaction is a electron reconfiguration. So what I mean by that is, think about the solar system. You have the sun, which is in the middle, and you have the 8 planets that orbits the sun. Those 8 planets orbiting the sun, keep that in mind, are analogous of how the inside of the atom functions, or how it appears, the environment within the atom. You have the nucleus, and outside the nucleus represents the sun in the analogy, and outside the nucleus you have what's called electrons. The electrons are analogous of the 8 planets that orbits the sun. So keeping in line with our analogy, we see that the nucleus is representing the sun, and the electrons represents the planets. When you have a chemical reaction, what happens is the electrons, which represents the planets, they actually are rearranged. So in a chemical reaction, there's a rearrange or a reconfiguration of the sequence of the electrons. So let's say you have electrons and they're represented by letters. So you say you have C, you have D, you have E, and you have A. That's the sequence of the electrons. When there's a chemical reaction, that sequence becomes rearranged, and instead of C, D, A, E, it will be A, D, E, C, or C, A, E, D. Whatever those 4 letters that represents the electrons are, they're going to be reconfigured. So their sequence is going to be altered. So the modification of the electrons is what the chemical reaction does. So it doesn't change anything within the nucleus, which is what's necessary for a changing of element. But as I used in the previous video, I spoke about water going into a gas state. A rearranging of electron configuration outside the nucleus simply changes water from a liquid to a gaseous state, or it can reverse. It can change it from a gas state back to a liquid, or from a liquid to a solid, which is ice, or vice versa, from an ice to a liquid. So it will always change the states, and the states of that water is simply being manifested or exhibited based on the electron configuration, the configuration of the electrons. It's very similar to our genes and our genetic code. It's very, very similar. The genetic code is so similar, it's amazing. When our genes are expressed, depending on the sequence will depend whether you're tall, you're short, blonde hair, green eyes, red eyes, whatever, right? So it's all about sequence. So chemical reactions don't change the person. the nuclear reaction does. You get a whole different person. You know, if you're with somebody who's beating on you, cheating on you, a sneak, and that person doesn't go through a nuclear reaction and they're going through chemical reactions, they're just altering and modifying their sneakiness or their gamesmanship. They're altering and modifying their gamesmanship. All right, but they're not going to have a nuclear reaction. Remember, when Malcolm X went into jail, he came out Malcolm Little. No, he went in Malcolm Little, excuse me. He went in Malcolm Little and came out Malcolm X. Matter of fact, he went in Detroit Red and came out Malcolm X. That's a perfect example of a nuclear reaction when a person changes, comes out a whole different person. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there and close that up. I hope that this was fruitful. All right, peace.